Thank you. How many of you are actually awake? Very good. I have a stage dog. This is Sagan, and she stays up here with me until my mom gets here. So if she runs off the stage because some of you are eating, just be nice to her. She doesn't fight. Right? She's glaring at me. So how many of you had a really good time this weekend? I want to thank everybody from Apostacon except Bill Newman, who's made my life hell, for a great weekend. Yeah, feels great. Let's give them a round of applause, seriously. And I want everyone to enjoy those warm feelings, the nice people you've met, the partying every night, because I'm going to try and ruin every good feeling you have right now. If you do not leave this room extraordinarily pissed off, I have not done my job. I'm going to tell you why you should be pissed off and in a permanently bad mood all the time. And it has to do with our government and how they spend your money. Anybody here ever earned $1, honestly? Which means you pay taxes on it. Come on, people. If you've ever filed a tax return, you're getting screwed by the government. How do you know that? I'm going to add to that feeling of rage right now. Okay, so if you can't tell, I'm going to be a little bit irreverent. Well, Dan Barker made all kinds of jokes about that. I'm not going to go there because I don't have the gravitas of having been a former preacher. But I am going to give you a little biblical history and give you a little bit of a way to make this more palatable. How many of you have read the Old Testament? Okay, so for those of you who haven't, and for those of you who maybe need a little refresher, according to the Hebrew and Christian Bibles, Aaron, the brother of Moses, created an idol. While Moses was being all serious and awesome and going to Mount Sinai and getting the 10 Commandments and lugging them and talking to a burning bush or whatever the frick it was, the Israelites were getting really bored and worried, and so somehow they had all this gold and they made an idol, and it was in the shape of a golden calf, and for some reason cows are really popular. I don't see what's so special about them. Milk's great. Veal? I don't know. Anyway, they made a golden calf. And when Moses came back, he was really upset about this. There are a couple of commandments that this violated, including the fact that not only are you not supposed to put God in the form of a calf or anything, but they were worshiping the wrong thing. So they destroyed it. And how does this matter? Well, we're going to pretend that the faith-based initiative, is the golden calf, and that religious organizations and the institutions are the Israelites. I get to be Moses. And I'm going to bring the Word of God in the form of the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. These are good things. And together we are going to destroy the faith-based initiative, the money-sucking, self-congratulating program posing as legitimate public policy. Yes, and I just want you to know that this is a real place in New Jersey, the land of make-believe. It is on East 46th. Okay, so where we stand today. According to the Office of Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships, this is Obama's variation of it, any church, mosque, or synagogue may apply directly to the government for faith-based funds. And these are from the state or federal government, and you can do this without a separate charitable purpose. So any church, synagogue, and I'm going to use church because that's where most of the money goes, but it really is any house of worship, okay, can apply for government grants. And can just do so because they're a house of worship. They don't have to have a separate charitable purpose or a separate charitable organization, okay? So just because you're a house of worship, you are automatically put into the category of being worthy of grant money. Whereas the rest of us, we have to form 501c3s, and we have to say what our purpose is. What good are we going to do the community? We are not automatically granted the status of being good for the community. Make sense? Okay. And then these organizations that get the money don't have to publicly report how they spend those faith-based funds. Because if you're a house of worship in the land of make-believe, you get to pass go, collect the grant money, and then not report it. So if you're a 501c3 that's not a house of worship, you not only have to pay a fee to be a 501c3, but then you have to fill out this thing called a Form 990, which can be extremely onerous. I mean, it's good. We want people to fill out Form 990s because then it's public record how you spend the money. American Atheist fills one out every year, and it shows you exactly how your donor money is spent. Okay? okay? Americans United, the Red Cross, which actually doesn't get government money, but it's a 501c3, and they tell you how they spend their money. Every 501c3 that's not a house of worship tells you how they spend their money. That's how Charity Navigator tells you how to rank things. That's how they do the formulas that say this percentage of money goes towards administrative costs, this money actually goes towards their charitable giving. That's what they do. But with a house of worship, they don't do that. Okay, so the faith-based initiative started with George W. Bush, who said, we want to fund programs that save Americans one soul at a time. So apparently it doesn't apply to us who don't believe we have souls, just like his father didn't believe that atheists, were Americans. And what it does is it allows these organizations to discriminate in who they hire and who they fire. And I have the Salvation Army up here because this has actually gone to court. And they tried this, they did this. They sent out surveys and questionnaires to their employees. And if you didn't answer the way they liked about your religious affiliation or even your sexual orientation, they fired you and didn't hire you. And they went to court over this, and according to how the faith-based initiative is set up now, because they're receiving this government funding and they're allowed to discriminate, the court said they can do it. They are an organized church. That's the Salvation Army. So think about that the next time you're tempted to put in a few quarters or more into one of those bell-ringing kettles. So what this means now is that billions of dollars are being doled out by the state and the federal government through the executive branches and the faith-based offices, and there's just going to faith-based initiatives, and we have no way of tracking it, no way of knowing how the money's being spent, and it's being done to organizations that are free to discriminate. Are you pissed off yet? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to get that all righteous, and feel free to yell out because that makes me feel better and it scares Satan. Okay, so a quick summary of laws, because I want to know how we got here and how it got so screwed up, because you know how Christians are always saying it used to be better? Well, it did used to be better. In the Civil Rights Act of 1964 says that it's unlawful for an employer to refuse to hire or discharge any individual for many reasons, including religion. And religion is covered, atheism, non-religion, is covered by religion under constitutional protections. How many of you believe in the freedom of speech? Good. How many of you believe in the freedom to not speak? Okay, so it's the same kind of thing. Not speaking gets the same protections as speaking. If you choose not to speak, that's still constitutionally protected, correct? Okay, so it's the same thing. So when somebody tells you that atheism is a religion, that's not true, but we get the same protections as religion because according to the Constitution, the freedom of religion also means you have the freedom not to have religion. And that's a very important distinction to make because I get thrown at me all the time. We get the constitutional protections of religion because we choose not to have religion, just like anyone who chooses to have the protections of freedom of speech also gets them when they choose not to speak. So fuck the draft. Now, there is an exemption to this, Title VII, which allowed religious organizations that had very specific purposes that were core to how they existed. So I guess you would say the Catholic Church has priests that can only be men. Now maybe that's going to change. Pope Francis is off the rails and smoking something, and I like it. But whatever he's doing, but up until now, it's been that you have to be a male in order to be a priest. So they would get an exemption in order to be able to only hire priests, males to be priests, okay? Now, and that was the rule under this exemption. It was fairly narrowly tailored, okay? Now, this has changed. In 2011, there was a Supreme Court case and it had to do with Tannenbaum, and that's the name of the case if you want to look it up. And it had to do with a teacher who was attached, it was a school that was attached to a church, and it happened to be a Lutheran church. And in order to be hired by the school, the congregation had to vote for you. And it was considered some sort of sacred purpose to be a teacher. And as part of your duties, there would be some Bible reading and you would teach some biblical scholarship to the students. And this is an elementary school. Well, the teacher got ill, and she took a leave of absence under Family Medical Leave Act, and also she used the American Disabilities Act. And she had to leave for quite a while. In the meantime, the congregation and the school hired someone else in her stead. And then they voted to keep her on permanently. So when the teacher got over her illness, she wanted to come back. And they said, sorry, you're no longer divinely employable. And so she sued under federal protections because, except for Title VII, churches and schools have to apply to all these federal laws. The Supreme Court ruled that the church and the school did not have to follow federal law. They did not have to follow the Americans with Disabilities Act, according to this teacher, because she acted as a pastor to the children.
Oh.
And Barry Lynn said it best that under the reading of how they wrote this opinion, a janitor could now become an essential member of a pastoral member of a church. So pretty much if you work for a house of worship or a religious organization, you have no protections. You cannot count on any federal protections against discrimination, the Americans with Disabilities Act, anything. You cannot count on that right now. They threw it out the window. And my mom is here. Everybody, that's my mom. Mom, call Sagan. Sagan. Hi, Sagan. Sorry, everybody. 10-second permission. Okay. So, good feelings, but everybody still pissed off?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, yes, grrr, we're pirates. Okay, so, we've got two very handsome gentlemen up here. The top one, just as so happens, is my 7th cousin 2 times removed. They're about their genealogy. Okay, so he used the federal executive orders to provide the first anti-discrimination policy, which has all been undone now, but he established it during World War II. What was happening is while all the men were going to war, a lot of minorities and women were left to stay home and work in the factories, but a lot of federal contractors wouldn't hire them. And so there was nobody to work in the factories. So he's like, fuck that. And so he passed a law that said if you're going to take money from the federal government and you're a federal contractor, you have to hire anybody who's qualified. So we got the first executive order from the president saying if you receive federal money, you can't discriminate. And that was a pretty good thing. Yes, we can applaud for him. And he I'm not sure I'm related to him, but I'm just going to say he is. LBJ then expanded that. He again used the executive order to expand it to any federal contractor, not just war contracts, not just ones that had to do with shipping or anything like that. He expanded it to all federal contractors. And that's the way it's been since 1965 until the 1990s. Now, what happened and what this meant was in order to get federal funding, you couldn't discriminate. And if you were a house of worship, you couldn't get federal money unless you formed a separate 501c3 for your charity. So Catholic charities had to be separate from the Catholic Church in order to get federal money. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. If Lutheran services wanted to provide housing and food and serve stuff to the poor, they had to form separately from the Lutheran Church, a separate 501c3 that was accountable because they wanted government money. If they didn't want government money, they didn't have to do the 501c3 separately. But in the 1990s, how many of you like what President Clinton did, like just with his executive powers? Not personally, but he did a lot of good things, right?
Yes.
He did a lot of shitty things too, okay? And one of them is charitable choice. John Ashcroft. You guys remember him? How many of you actually do remember who John Ashcroft is? Okay, how many of you are from Missouri? I'm really sorry. In the 1996, I know you guys are too, in the Welfare Reform Act, what they did is they put it in that for the first time since these employment discrimination laws have been passed, that you could get federal money under the Welfare Reform Act for social services and not form that separate 501c3. So it was the first chink in that armor between separation of religion and government and social services. And Bill Clinton signed it. Now, secular groups have always had to form a 501c3 to get money. And there wasn't a single secular group that got an exemption from this. There wasn't a group that raised their hand and said, we're awesome, and we should just get money and not have to file the Form 990. This only applied to churches, okay, to houses of worship that were somehow exempt from those regulations. So I just wanted to make sure you guys understand that they're slipping by. They're somehow above everyone else. And this is where it happened, okay? So then Bush got into office, Bush Jr., Bush W., whatever.
Bush W.
Yeah, that too. And he turned charitable choice into a major executive branch program. Charitable choice was in Congress, and the president had to sign it. But under the faith-based initiative, it became an executive branch program. And he used executive orders to create it. And what it did is it established it in 9 departments, and this was specifically to start funneling grants from these executive branch offices to faith-based groups and community groups, okay? But the emphasis was always on faith-based groups. And Executive Order 13279, don't ever use that as your PIN number because I always guess it when I find a credit card, made it easier for churches and other faith-based groups to receive the federal money. And this is where it allowed them to have anti-discrimination. It took away the anti-discrimination. So not only could you now get federal money, but it stripped away that protection. And it took away religion and color and LGBT protection, all that kind of stuff got stripped away. It was gone. And that's when the Salvation Army started sending out those questionnaires, and they started laying off people, and they were challenged, and they won. So now, millions and billions of dollars are being pushed through the executive branch because that's where the education department is, that's where HUD is, that's where Health and Human Services is. All that money is being funneled, and it goes out in grants. And it is like trying to read Greek backwards to find out where the money is going and track it and find out how it's spent. There's a guy named David Kuo. He actually blew the whistle on this first in 2006 with his book. He just died in August of a brain tumor. He was actually a very devout evangelical. He didn't like the way the Bush administration corrupted this. Didn't like the way they were pushing the money for political reasons to gain favor with big name religious organizations and with the religious right and all the big names that you don't like, Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell, who was alive at the time. So he blew the whistle. But then after Bush left, it didn't stop. And Politico found that in 2011, when the stimulus plan went through, Obama's people pushed more money, the stimulus money, into houses of worship. So they get new boilers and new roofs and to generate jobs in the community, and so the houses of worship will be fixed. If your congregation can't afford a new boiler or a new roof, tear it down and let us build something that actually generates tax dollars for the community, right? But no. And in fact, when the Obama administration couldn't get states to do this, they actually went over the state departments, the state's officials, to do it to the individual groups themselves. So, a couple examples of this that I want to share. When there was a county in Georgia, and this actually went to court, and Georgia was a state program, and that's why we know about it. There was a drug program in the county, keeping an eye on time, and it was run by a Catholic group. And it was a rural program, it was a drug rehabilitation program, and they needed a drug counselor. And they only had a few candidates, and only one qualified candidate applied. And the very last question asked in the interview was, "What is your religion?" And the man answered honestly, he says, "I'm Jewish." And he was told right back, "Well, we're sorry, we can't hire you. We're Catholic. We don't hire anyone but Catholics." So he sued. And Georgia decided, in the court that ruled there, it said that they had to take somebody rather than nobody, even if it wasn't the same religion. By then, he didn't want the job. But they would have rather let the job go empty or hired a non-qualified candidate than take the most qualified person because it wasn't the same religion. How is that helping anybody? Another example of this that I think is even more atrocious is there's something called the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And they had all the lobbying, yes, boo. They had all of the lobbying, and they had a lot of the grant programs from Washington, D.C. And I don't know if any of you remember, there was a lot of hearings on contraception and stuff, and there was this very famous House committee, and there was a group of men, and they asked where were the women. One of the representatives rose from this conference of Catholic bishops about a year and a half ago. And they were giving a contract from Health and Human Services to help sex trafficking victims, women and children in particular, and this included services for sexual violence. So these were women and children who'd been victims of sexual violence, who needed medical care and counseling. And in several cases through the years, it was found that the Catholic bishops did not provide those services, flat out. And that they sometimes farmed them out to a third party, but never followed up to make sure that the services were actually provided. And when it came to light through an investigation, because of some complaints that were filed, the bishop said, well, it's not our practice, it's not our religious belief that these services are necessary. But the point of the grant was to help the victims, not to satisfy the religious beliefs of the person providing the services. So it was a big scandal, and the next year, Health and Human Services provided it to the next person or next group in line to provide the services. And when they're rated by how well they fill out the form for the grant, they were almost identical, okay? Because of course the Catholic bishops said that they would provide these services. And they went and they complained to members of Congress, and they had a hearing on this. And they claimed they were being discriminated on their religious faith. Nobody gave a shit about the fact that those victims of sex trafficking weren't getting the services they needed. Except women's rights advocates, the Secular Coalition for America, and its members, which included American Atheists, AHA, the Secular Student Alliance, and the other 7 members. So you guys, if you're members, you should pat yourselves on the back because we were there and we fought for it and we kept the Catholic bishops from getting that contract again. But if that came to light, and it took so much investigation by an independent agency, and we had to fight through a congressional hearing to keep it from happening again. Imagine how many times in the States this is happening. We know that Catholic groups, and I'm picking on the Catholics because they're so high profile, but it's not just the Catholics. They deny gay and single women, gay parents and single parents, adoptions from children who are in the system because it doesn't fit their religious profile of what a parent should be. There are hundreds of thousands of children who could be in good homes, but parents are turned away because they don't fit the Catholic ideal of what a parent should be. So let's give those contracts to secular organizations that know that all you need to be is a loving person to be a good parent. But there's a method to this madness about why this happened. Bush didn't do this because he was actually a compassionate conservative. He did it to get votes. Because this money is a pipeline that doesn't get recorded when it comes to campaign finance. It's very difficult to track. It's not being reported back in an easy fashion. When there are millions and millions of dollars of contracts being doled out, and you try to search, you can't search for faith-based organizations. You have to search for the individual name of the organization, many of which no longer exist after they get the grant. There's no great way to search back about what the results were. Like if you get a grant to start a program to feed the hungry in San Antonio, there's no way to know when the program ended or what the results were because it's such a slow process. It could be years before the results come back. And by then the money's gone, and so is the organization that took the money. It's only really high-profile groups and organizations that have been around for a while where we can find the money and track it, and that's when it comes to light. So, it's a completely separate funding stream. It can be doled out however the executive branch wants. So this is a conspiracy theory. You know the right gets all of them, and we think they're crazy? I'm going to give you a conspiracy that you can go tell your friends and you can put data behind it. President Obama specifically mentioned the faith-based initiative in his 2012 convention speech. He's behind this. Faith-based initiatives now exist in 15 federal departments and agencies. Even religious leaders are against it. Barry Lynn of Americans United hates this program, okay? Melissa Rogers, who now heads it, used to be against it. And it's now in the State Department. And you know why? Because the number one goal of evangelicals is to protect Christians abroad. So now they can do that. There's no official tracking of the faith-based funds since the start of the George W. Bush administration. There's no way to know how the religious organizations are spending money, and there's no method to track any discrimination complaints. Because the Attorney General said we'll do it on a case-by-case basis. We've filed FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, and they're mired down. They haven't been rejected. They just haven't gotten back to us yet. It can take years to get them back. So they just stick them somewhere. We've tried asking written letters from the Coalition Against Religious Discrimination, which the SCA, and by association, many of the national organizations belong to, can't get any answers. This is an example of how far it's come. Superstorm Sandy affected many people on the East Coast. 592 is a House bill that passed earlier this year. It's going to give direct federal funding to houses of worship that were damaged by federal disasters. So your tax dollars are not going to go fix houses of worship. It passed in the House handily. Even Democrats voted for it because they're afraid. So it's now up in the House, or it's up in the Senate. And this is what it says. This is the Senate version. And it's sponsored by a Democrat from New York. You all need to be on your, I have a book called The Citizen Lobbyist. It tells you how to meet with your representatives and your senators. You need to be meeting with your senators or writing them letters telling them this is bullshit. It says specifically that churches are assets to their community. And it lumps them in with community services and public pools and all those things. Churches are empty 85% of the time. They don't provide any kind of public taxes. They don't provide, how many of you have ever held an event in church other than Unitarian Universal Church or gone to, except a wedding or a funeral? Very few, they don't do anything. But we're now going to pay to have them fixed because they can't afford to fix them themselves. They don't have insurance and the people who belong to them can't pay for it. They don't get my money. Do you want them to get their money?
No.
Okay, then fucking call your senator and tell them that. Because you didn't do it when the House was voting on it. What were you doing? Sleeping? It was spring break. You were drinking beer. Do something about it. You can go on Thomas, and you can see what they're doing. Thomas is the Library of Congress's website, and it tracks every bill that the House and the Senate do. You can see exactly how inactive, and when they say how many times they tried to repeal Obamacare, you can actually go count it for yourself. And just type in Obamacare, because that's what they call it, or the Reform Health Medical Act. I don't remember what it's called. Thank you. But seriously, that's all you have to do to go find all this shit. So, here's the conspiracy theory. The Heine case, people went after this. Don't think that anyone's been sitting on their hands. FFR went after this with a vengeance. And the Supreme Court, which we love, ruled in 2007 that the executive branch does not answer to the people. That we don't get to say how they spend the money. So we don't get to go up, and we can't sue how they spend the money. There's no reporting or accounting for the funds. We can't argue how they're discriminating, because it's an executive order. It's not a legislative issue. We can't go to Congress and try and get them to pass it. And the IRS does not act. Right now, all it would take is the IRS. We could complain about how they're spending money, any house of worship, if we could get an audit. But there's a special piece of language in the IRS code that says it takes someone who is a higher authority. And it went to court. Michelle Bachmann had an organization, had a church that was raising funds for her, and we sued. One of our fellow national organizations sued, and it went all the way to the federal district court, or between the circuit court, and they rejected it because it was just a low-level officer who did the audit. You have to have a high officer to audit a house of worship. I guarantee anyone here who belongs to a 501c3 that's not a house of worship, anybody can audit you. So all it would take is somebody to be nominated or appointed to that position or designated, but the IRS won't do it. So we can't ask for audits for any organization that we think is misspending federal money. Presidents and governors are allowed to funnel millions of dollars to their faith-based initiatives. It can be spent however they want. They can direct the money to any of the departmts. It can be spread out from there, and we can't account for it. And we have tried, believe me. If I could have the numbers up here, I would, but I can't. So, in my opinion, this is my conspiracy theory, I think they're using it as a political machine. It's really, really cool to be able to spend millions of dollars in churches and then ask, not directly, but then wouldn't it be nice if that pastor then said, it's thanks to the Obama administration or the Bush administration or the Clinton administration or whoever runs next, the Rand Paul administration, Rand Paul, he's the one who's going to run, Ted Cruz, whoever, that we have this nice new roof. Or pick your favorite governor. Maybe Palin will run again. I guarantee you that if Obama didn't get rid of it, nobody's going to get rid of it. And it's going to keep going. So how do we stop it? You have to speak up. You have to speak up. There are mailing lists in every state for faith-based initiatives. How many of you are on it? One of the best ways to fight the enemy is to know what the enemy is doing. And I think the faith-based initiative is our enemy. So get on their email list. Find out where the money's going. Find out. And then protest it. Go talk to your senator. Stop them from funding out in the open with congressional money, which isn't even related to the faith-based initiative, then houses of worship are going to get your tax dollars to fix after a federal disaster. Tell them to buy insurance. Demand parity between religious organizations and secular organizations. There is nothing special about religion. Don't treat it like it, and don't let them get away with it. American Atheist is suing the IRS right now for how it treats religious organizations versus secular ones. We're suing that process where the house of worship gets to pass right by the fee to pay to be a 501c3, gets to pass by the Form 990. So if you want to do something, become a member of American Atheists so we can come to your state and sue too. How many of you are pissed off? Good. So become a member of American Atheists, go talk to your senator, go buy my fucking book, and I will tell you exactly how to do it. Thank you. You've been a great audience. I really appreciate it.